Hello and welcome to Topic 6, Lecture 1. And in this topic, we're going to be learning about the United States Congress. So, Topic 6 is the start of our second unit for this semester. And the second unit for this semester focuses on the institutions of government. And so, the first institution that we're going to be taking a look at is the legislative branch, the United States Congress. And I do want to note that Topic 6 is not Chapter 6, okay? Up to this point, the topic numbers have corresponded with the chapter numbers, but that changes with this unit. And so Topic 6 is on Congress, and Chapter 12 is the chapter that covers Congress in your textbook. I just wanted to make that note so that you don't get confused as you're just moving on to Chapter 6 and saying, hey, this has nothing to do with Congress. Now, this is the last topic we're going to be covering before the midterm exam. The midterm exam is, you'll receive it on, I think, October 22nd, and then you have until October 26th to turn that exam in. It is an essay exam. We're going to be talking about more about that in the future. But I just wanted to let you know that the first exam covers topics 1 through 6, and this is the last topic before we take our exam. And so Unit 2, as I mentioned, it focuses on the institutions of American government. We start with Congress, and then after our midterm exam, we'll come back and we will cover the executive branch, including the presidency and the federal judiciary, the Supreme Court of the United States. So in this in these two lectures, we're going to be learning about U.S. Congress, and we're going to start with an overview. Then we're going to talk about the difference between the House and the Senate. And then we'll talk about the role that democracy plays in the design of the United States Congress. So let's get started. So the federal legislature, or the federal lawmaking branch, is called the United States Congress. And the United States Congress is composed of two chambers. What that means is that it is a bicameral legislation. Bi meaning two, cameral meaning chambers. And the two chambers that make up the United States Congress are the United States House of Representatives and the United States Senate. Okay, so sometimes students get confused and that they might think that the federal legislature is Congress and the Senate, or the House and Congress. And those aren't the proper use of those terms. When we're talking about the whole of the federal legislature, okay, we're talking about the United States Congress. And the Congress is comprised of two different houses, right? The House of Representatives and the United States Senate, okay? So hopefully that's clear in terms of the way that those terms should be used. Now, the United States Congress is established by Article 1 of the United States Constitution. So Article 1 is the legislature, Congress. Article 2 establishes the executive branch, the presidency. And Article 3 establishes the federal judiciary, the Supreme Court of the United States. Okay? So, sometimes that's an easy way of thinking about, of the 7 articles, the first 3 have to do with the establishment of the institutions of American government. And I really encourage you to take a look at Article 1 of the Constitution. It's in the back of the textbook. You can also look at it online. And it really helps to just sort of, take a look at when the delegates were at the Constitutional Convention, like what did they come up with in Article 1, right? In that, you'll see that Article 1 tells us the design of Congress. It tells us that it's going to be bicameral, and that, in other words, that it's going to have both the House and the Senate. It talks about how the members of Congress are elected and their terms of office, how long they serve. It tells us about the process of lawmaking, and it also establishes the powers of Congress. I think earlier in the semester we talked about the importance of Article 1, Section 8, because those are the enumerated powers of Congress. So I encourage you to take a look, not just at Article 1, Section 8, but of the whole Article 1 to get a real good sense of what the Constitution says about the design and power of Congress. Okay, so we learned earlier in the semester that the United States Congress, that the two chambers are different in some significant ways. And so we know that at the Constitutional Convention, there was a disagreement about how representatives should be assigned to Congress. Should representatives be based on population? That is, that the more people that live in the state, the more representation you get in Congress. Or should each state get the equal number of representatives? So each state has equal say in the Congress. As we know, as a product of the Great Compromise, that we have two chambers that their design is different. And so that we know that the United States House of Representatives, that the representation is based on population. So the more people that live in your state, the more representatives you get in the House of Representatives. We know that each representative serves a 2-year term, and so that is the shortest term of office. The thinking is that since the United States House of Representation or the House of Representatives was based on population, it's kind of closest to the people. And so the delegates and the framers, they wanted the House to constantly be, close to the people and up for re-election, kind of making that link between the representative and the people that they're representing stronger. Okay. So they have a two-year term. There are no term limits in either the House of Representatives or in the Senate. There's only a term limit for the President of the United States, and we will learn about that, when we get to it. That in the House of Representatives, there are 435 members. That's not in the Constitution, but that's set by federal law, okay? And so since the 1920s, the number of members of the House has been set at 435. That number could be increased if we passed new federal law, increasing the number of the members of the House of Representatives. We do have 6 non-voting members in the House, and so that there are 5 delegates that come from D.C., Guam, America Samoa, U.S. Virgin Islands, and the Northern Mariana Islands, and then there's 1 resident commissioner from Puerto Rico. Okay, and so those people come to Congress, but they don't have a vote in Congress, but they do get to represent the interests of those different territories within the United States. When it comes to the House of Representatives, the people who work in the House are a lot more locally focused. That each member of the House represents a congressional district. Okay, we're going to take a look at that in a little bit. And so the congressional district, they're all apportioned. Now each congressional district represents about 760,000 people, and representatives kind of represent their district, the interests of their district. And so in that way, they're more locally focused. If your district is an urban district with urban concerns, your representative is going to be focusing on those local matters, try to get on committees that are going to represent their district well. If you live in a rural area, then you would, your interest would be locally focused on rural issues. The House is prestigious, but it's less prestigious than being in the Senate. Oftentimes, being in the House is seen as a stepping stone to moving up and getting elected into the United States Senate. Now, Wisconsin population is relatively small. It's not the smallest state populous. It's not the least populous state in the nation by any means, but it's relatively small. And so we have 8 congressional districts in the state of Wisconsin, 8 House seats. And for the 2 members of the House that kind of come from the Washington County, Waukesha County, and Milwaukee County areas, there are 2 members of the House. So if you live in the Milwaukee County area, then your member of the House, your representative, is Representative Gwen Moore, and she is from the 4th Congressional District in Wisconsin. And she has been a member of Congress since 2005. So even though she's runs for re-election every 2 years, she's been re-elected since the election in 2004. If you live in Waukesha and Washington counties, that's the Congressional District 5 in Wisconsin, and that we have a new member, Representative Scott Fitzgerald. He used to be in the Wisconsin state legislature, and he's moved up to take the seat that had been held for a very long period of time by James Sensenbrenner. Okay, so he's very new to Congress. But those are our 2 representatives for the House that are from the region that most of you are likely to live in. Okay, that move leads us to the United States Senate. As we know, the United States Senate is each state gets equal representation. Okay, again, a part of the Great Compromise and that took place at the Constitutional Convention. Senators serve a much longer term. Again, there are no term limits. They can serve for as long as they continue to get reelected. But each of their terms is 6 years long. So once you're elected, you serve for 6 years and then you stand for reelection. Each state gets equal representation. So that means that we have 50 states in the United States. Each state gets 2, regardless of how large or small their population is, and it makes for 100 senators in the United States Senate. The Senate is more prestigious, as I mentioned in the last slide. It can sometimes be a stepping stone to the presidency of the United States. President Barack Obama, prior to him becoming the president, he was the senator from Illinois. And Joe Biden was also the senator from Delaware. And so, again, he was also vice president. So, it's kind of a stepping stone as well. And also the focus of those in Senate is oftentimes not just unique to their state. Oftentimes, senators will look at more nationwide problems and also international problems as well. And so their focus is more broad and more national. It's also a more deliberative branch. It's smaller since the House is large. You're going to see that the differences in the House is that there are a lot more rules in the House, that there's a lot of limits on how bills are discussed. The leaders in the House have a lot of power in terms of the legislative process. So you're going to be learning about that. The Senate is more deliberative. It's a smaller body. There are less limits on the conversation. But you will be learning about the filibuster as well, that you actually need a supermajority to get things done in the United States Senate. So make sure you pay attention to some of those key concepts that you'll be reading about in the chapter. Wisconsin has 2 senators, Tammy Baldwin and Ron Johnson. They've both been in the Senate for quite some period of time. Tammy Baldwin is a Democrat. Ron Johnson is a Republican. On the previous slide, I forgot to mention that Gwen Moore is a Democrat and Scott Fitzgerald is a Republican, because Wisconsin's kind of a mixed state. We're kind of purple. What's unique about Tammy Baldwin and Ron Johnson is that Tammy Baldwin is probably one of the most liberal senators in the U.S. Senate, and Ron Johnson is probably one of the most conservative senators. Ron Johnson is up for re-election in 2022. He has not specifically stated whether or not he's actually running for re-election, although I wouldn't be surprised if he does run for re-election. So keep your eyes open for that. Okay, so this is a graph from your textbook that shows you the differences between the House and the Senate. That there is an age requirement to serve in the House and the Senate, and the age requirement is a little bit different. You need to be 25 years to run for the House of Representatives. You need to be Senate 30 years in order to serve in the Senate. Again, that has to do with sort of the prestige of the institutions. The Senate, smaller, more deliberative, representing sort of the interests of the state and the nation. And so I think that the delegates were, wanting somebody to be a little bit older, assuming that they might have more political experience that might come with that age, even though there's no political experience requirement that is in the Constitution. You do need to be a United States citizen to serve in the House and the Senate. However, you don't need to be born in the United States. Only the President of the United States needs to be born in the United States to serve as the President. So 7-year requirement citizenship, 9-year requirement for the Senate. We know the difference in the length of terms, 2 versus 6. We know that the bigger your state is, the more members in the House. Every state, regardless of how small its population, gets at least one member, one representative for the House. And a large state like California has 53 representatives, so a lot. And then the constituency is something that I haven't talked about that term. The constituency is the people that the representative or the senator are representing in their respective bodies. And so take, for example, Gwen Moore. She is the representative for the 5th Congressional District in Wisconsin. So her constituency is the 5th district. It's people that mostly live in the Milwaukee County area. For that, she's from the 4th district. Did I say 5th? She's from the 4th district. Scott Fitzgerald is representing the 5th district, and the 5th district, that's his constituency, and that's, mostly people who live in the Waukesha and Washington County area. And so the constituency of senators, though, is their entire state, okay? Because they represent everybody from the state, because all of the state has an opportunity to elect them. Okay, so let's talk about the elections that are associated with electing members of Congress. So every 2 years in the United States, there is a federal election, okay? One of those election cycles is known as the presidential election cycle, and the other is known as the midterm election cycle. So let me use a concrete example here. The last presidential election cycle was 2020, and that was an election between the sitting President Trump and the challenger at that time, Vice President Joe Biden. He wasn't the vice president, but that was the title that he went by. And Joe Biden won, so he's the president of the United States. The next presidential election will be in 2024 because the term of the president is 4 years long. Okay, so in a presidential election cycle, though, we aren't just electing the president of the United States, but we're also electing members of Congress as well. The midterm election takes place every 2 years. Since members of the House of Representatives are elected every 2 years, there is a federal election every 2 years. So the upcoming midterm will be in 2022. And before you know it, it'll be in November. It'll be here before you know it. So every 2 years, all members of the House of Representatives are up for re-election. So they get re-elected during a presidential election year and also during a midterm election year. And every 2 years, 1/3 of the Senate is up for re-election. Since their term is 6 years long, they kind of divide it up into thirds, and every third of the Senate is re-elected every 2 years. So every 2 years, we have a federal election. As you know, members can serve as long as they want, or really as long as their constituents want them to serve. There are no term limits in either the House or the Senate. So since there is a federal election every 2 years, a new Congress is seated, okay? And so that, as it says there, every 2 years, a new session of Congress begins. And each session of Congress is numbered, okay? So again, these are just sort of the nuts and bolts of how to negotiate, how to understand Congress. A session of Congress is obviously 2 years, and that the current session of Congress is known as the 117th U.S. Congress, okay? And it runs from January 3rd. That's when senators and members of the House take their seats. They're elected in the November election, and then they don't actually formally take office. They're sworn in on January 3rd. And so the members of the 117th Congress were sworn in on January 3rd, 2021, and they will serve until January 3rd, 2023. And they may join the new session of Congress if they are reelected in that midterm election that will take place in November of 2022. Okay, and the final slide that we're going to look at in this lecture, I'm going to break this lecture up into two, just because there's sort of a lot of material to learn about Congress. So the first part of the first lecture will stop with this slide, okay? And this just will show you sort of the makeup, the party makeup of the current 117th Congress, okay? So as we know, when people run for office, they run as a Democrat or Republican. Sometimes they run as an independent. But the way our system is set up, it's set up to be a two-party system. And we'll talk about that more later in the semester when we talk about the elections in the United States and how elections in the United States support a two-party system. That is, two major parties. So the two major parties, as many of you know, in the United States are the Democrats and the Republicans. And when it comes to Congress, it is really important if your party gets the majority in either the House of Representatives or in the Senate. For the House of Representatives, that you just need a simple majority to pass laws. So 50% plus one of the members of the House, you can pass a bill. In the Senate, because of the Because of the filibuster, you'll be reading about that in the textbook, you actually need 60 senators to get a bill passed through the Senate. You need a supermajority. It's not a part of the Constitution. It's a rule from Senate. If we wanted to get rid of that rule, we could. There's a lot of conversation right now about ending the filibuster, okay? But just keep that in mind, that you need 60 senators to get anything done in the Senate, to pass a bill in the Senate, for the most part. And 50% plus one of the members of the House, okay? So right now, the Democrats have the majority in both the House of Representatives and in the Senate, but it's a very small majority. There are 220 Democrats in the House. There are 212 Republicans in the House, so the Democrats have the majority. As I mentioned, there are 6 non-voting members, so they don't help pass bills. There are currently 3 vacancies. So right now, the Democrats have a 51% margin in terms of their majority. And so they almost need every Democrat to vote with them if they want to get bills done. The Senate is the Democrats. It may not look like it on that slide, but the Democrats do have the majority, a very slim majority in the Senate. So there are 48 Democratic senators. There are 50 Republican senators. However, there are 2 independent senators, but they both caucus with the Democrats. One of those independent senators is Bernie Sanders from Vermont. He's more of a Democratic socialist, but he votes with the Democrats for the most part. And the other is Angus King from the state of Maine. So that makes it a 50-50 split. And so you say, well, why is that a majority, Professor Hankinson? Well, it's a majority because if there is a tie, then the Vice President of the United States serves as the President of the Senate. And if there's ever a tie, the Vice President steps in and breaks the tie. And so since Kamala Harris is a Democrat, if there is a 50-50 tie, she will cast the deciding vote. If you've been following the news at all, you'll see that that the Democrats are, it's difficult for them to get things done due to their very slim majorities. And right now they are trying to get an infrastructure bill passed. It passed the Senate with bipartisan support, but it's having a hard time getting through the House because some of the progressive Democrats don't want to vote for the infrastructure bill unless they pass the Build Back Better budget, which is this comprehensive sort of social spending bill. And for that kind of budget bill, you actually only need 50 Democrats or 51 Democrats. So if they can keep all the Democrats together, they could pass that Build Back Better budget. They need 50 because it's a budget resolution. And so keep your eyes open on that because it'll really sort of show the power of the parties. Okay, that's it for part 1. There's going to be a longer lecture this week just because Congress is huge and there's a lot to learn about. So see you in a little bit for part 2 of lecture 1.